Right, okay. Welcome back to our, we've got less people here. Welcome to the special town council meeting of January 30th, 2024. It is to deal with the item in the public hearing, and could I have a motion to approve the agenda, please? Thank you, Councillor Madeira Voss, and I saw a seconder from the deputy mayor. All those in favor, please indicate by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? That is passed. Is there anybody here for public input? You only get 3 minutes this time. And we have nobody online for public input. All right, we have one motion from the public hearing.
Can I ask a question before we go for the motion?
Sure.
I see our counselors here, or our
Solicitor.
solicitor, we're counselors, he's solicitor. Are we going to be going in camera?
That is not our intent to go in camera tonight. So actually, Charles and I were just having a discussion. It's not our intent to get into something that would require an in-camera or detailed legal questions to him, because he obviously hasn't been prepped. Have I got that correct?
Well, my concern about going in or discussing legal issues in open council is that it would be solicitor-client advice, especially if we get into legal options and potential for risk to the town or liability. Then we would not want to discuss those kinds of things in the public meeting.
That's exactly my question.
So should we have a question like that, I'm going to look to our interim CAO.
Thank you, Worship. Now, consistent with what our solicitors share with us, if issues come up that relate to those types of considerations, then obviously council needs to have that discussion so as to benefit from the advice from our solicitor, and it would be in camera. And that, so while I'm uncertain as to what the questions might be in that, perhaps if there's whatever the other general questions are in relation to the business at hand, then certainly pursue those. And if there is a need to do so, at the end of the day, the council needs to benefit from having our solicitor with us. And if there's a particular question or something that you need to have that sage advice in order to guide the decisions that you'll be making.
All right, so maybe when we get to that point, if there are questions that are determined to be of a nature that we need to go in camera, we will do that. All right, thank you.
Mayor Donovan,
yes.
does that mean we need to add that to the agenda or just do it on the fly?
Good question. I don't know.
Yeah.
CEO?
I would say through the chair to council, if that should arise, it would you don't put that on to the agenda because it's presumptuous in terms of it's not a necessity that it would go to in camera. However, as the discussion evolves, should matters of that nature come up, then council has that option in which to discuss it in camera. So.
Okay, all right, thank you. So item 3. You have a question?
I have a question, if I may.
Pardon me?
No, it's not a procedural question. I just have a question. So
Oh, well, we're going to get the question.
got the light on,
Yes,
just ready
okay.
for that.
Okay, no
So-
more procedural questions.
No, I'm going to move the thing. Make the
Okay.
motion.
We did approve the agenda. We have moved to public input. We've confirmed that should we get something that we are going into a legal situation, we would maybe ask other questions first, and then if that's needed, we would. So I'm going to ask Director Lake, you are not going to do another presentation. So what I was going to do is we'll get the motion on the floor, and then I will, unless you are going to do another presentation, I was going to open it to council for comments and questions.
I was just going to suggest going through some of the comments, but they'll probably come up in the questions. So
Let's get the motion on the floor, and then what I will do is turn it to anybody on council who wants to ask questions. And then if we don't ask all those questions, Director Lake, you could add those. Does that work? Isabel, Councilor Madeira Voss,
As chair of PAC,
Chair of PAC, yes.
I am going to move that council approve the proposed development agreement amendments to 292 Main Street, PID 55278675, as outlined in RFD 063-2023 and supporting documents.
And the seconder, please, Councillor Butler. All right, are there questions of council to Director Lake? Let's get questions and then comments. Deputy Mayor.
Thank you.
May I ask, can we ask questions so that in order? Like, so if Deputy Mayor Elliott, I'm sorry, that is that ask or make as a question about trees, I don't know. Can we talk about trees and whole
good.
and then the next topic and the next up, because it gets a little bit confusing if we're going backwards and forwards.
Good point.
to
So
follow up
if
each other.
she
Does
should
that make
talk
sense?
about trees, I'll say, does anybody else have any questions
about
related
trees.
to trees? Nobody out there is going to understand what we're talking about. Ask your tree question.
Nigeria.
This is not a
About
tree
trees.
question. What I wanted to clarify is the 2019 permit still valid?
So I'm going to take a step back on how this process works, because this is going to be relevant to some other questions as well. And so when we're working with someone through a development agreement, once there is an approval, there's a follow-up process. And sometimes we will allude in the agreement to details that we are still working on, like the transformer. And we would require them through the development permit and or the building permit to bring those details, because they're not, changing the entire building or something. They're usually landscaping details, stuff like that. But I think it's important for people to keep in mind here that we're asking every time we do this, I'm going to the developer and saying, can you do X, whatever it may be? And there is a cost associated with all those changes. So at a certain point, I do pull back until there's more certainty on the approval for asking them to spend more money, essentially. In some of these drawings that they're working through, there's maybe up to 4 or 5 professionals involved that are kind of overlapping in their review. So what we've said in some of the previous documentation is that we're getting them to submit a fresh package when we had the other building approved, we were working on a couple of stages of permitting. So now we're just submitting a fresh package with all of this in it. And that was stated in the January report, I believe, discussing the building inspections process. And then there's also a role for our development officer there with the development permit. So there's some pieces that we would still require, particularly around the site, that would be relevant to the development permit, and then the building details are in the building permit.
I'm still not clear. So there's 2 development projects. One of them is approved with not all the details. It's being revamped as a second run at the same property.
Yeah, so the other building is not being built. It's not relevant anymore. Our inspectors have stopped their review. And so we are suggesting to the architect and the applicant that we want a new package, because there's changes in the building that we have to review. We can't sort of knit together the 2 packages. The 2019 building is not proceeding. They're asking for these amendments, which necessitate a fresh set of drawings, a fresh building permit review, a fresh development permit review.
Okay.
I think you might be asking, is the development agreement, anything of the 29 development agreement still in the picture?
Oh, sorry. I thought you were referring to after the approval of the development agreement, there was some proceeding on the actual permits. The development agreement still stands.
That was my question.
Sorry, yes,
So
of
if
course.
this-
They have
if this
approval for
new-
that building that we're showing.
If this new iteration isn't approved tonight, the other permit still stands.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah, that hasn't been discharged in any way. Yeah.
Are there any other questions related to that topic?
So if indeed
Councillor
the
Clay.
thank you, sorry, if indeed the 2019 DA still stands, however, it can't be built because our building inspectors stopped it. No? It can be built.
Our building inspectors stopped at it. So the construction methodology changed, mostly to get this project to a point that it can be built economically. And so the price of steel was obviously quite a bit higher than wood. And during the pandemic, at one point, the opposite was true. And so there's been this big fluctuation in the construction economy. The reason we're receiving this amending application is because this project that is approved in 2019 is not viable, or he would be moving forward and building it.
So this is an amendment, not a whole new development agreement. Any other questions along that line?
But I just wanted to confirm that the
Councilman
changes,
Moss?
sorry.
Go ahead.
Mayor, was not that our building inspectors stopped it. It had to do with the code, right? And that they were interpreting, or there was a discussion around the code, but it wasn't, there may have been some delays in making adjustments to the interpretation of the code, but I don't believe our building inspectors stopped the project.
No, our building inspector stopped the work on that project because that project, the materials were changing. Is that
Yeah,
correct?
so there's been a number of rounds of review of a project of this scale, okay? So when I got this amending application, our building inspectors had a set of plans on their desk for the approved building that Councillor Elliott is asking about, the 2019 approval. We stopped reviewing that because we are then, things changed as pro formas are being worked up and as things are changing and pricing is changing, we stopped. And so there has been a lot of involvement from our building officials in terms of code compliance, working through it with their design team, and certainly that has taken a long time, without question. That's a tough. All of this stuff is interwoven, and so our building officials are one input into this. Council has been one, PAC, Design Review Committee, all of these different inputs have come into this process, and that's why we're here in 5 years. The nature of the process and the nature of some of the changes that were necessitated.
If there are no other questions on the development agreement, other questions? Councillor Butler.
I just have a couple of sort of design questions and I guess a comment, but it's a question technically. On page 46 of our package, it's the ground level, the parking level image. And I just have a question. There are two parking spot 1 and 15 are designated as the handicap parking spots. Is that a finished idea? I'm wondering why one of those is at the one side of the parking lot and the other is at the other far end of the parking lot, neither near the elevator. They seem like they're not the best spots for handicap parking, and I'm just wondering why that is. To go along with that, because the handicap parking spot in number 1 is right beside the recycling and garbage containment unit, it got me to thinking, I'm a bit of a garbage nut at my apartment. There's only 16 units in the building that I live in, and our garbage enclosure is twice that size. So you have 60 units plus 2 restaurants. That garbage facility is not big enough if you're doing garbage pickup every 2 weeks. So 5.1.6 in the agreement talks about additional garbage space allotment. Where would that be, since we were talking about the transformer and there's no designated spot for that? Where would additional garbage be? Would you make arrangements for it to be picked up weekly? Is there a separate spot for the restaurant? If you've walked down Main Street or any other street in the dead of summer in this town, you know that it stinks. So having all of that in the parking encampment next to a handicap parking spot, when you have a restaurant and all of those units, it's not big enough. So I'm wondering what provisions are being made a question of clarification on the handicap spots. And then I do have a question about parking that if I'll wait for the answers to those things first.
Director Lake, can you respond to that?
Shed a little light.
I know, and some of this, I don't know if there's a comfort level for the project architect to answer some of this. I'm probably not going to have all the answers to some of these detailed building or operational questions, just to be clear.
Council feel about having the architect answer those questions?
I can speak from my seat, and I think Tom can add a different perspective. So
Well, whoever can add
Valley Waste has,
perspective that
Just a
answers the
little bit,
questions.
just-
so Valley Waste has been engaged in this, is my understanding. From the developer is there's been some consultation with Valley Waste, the waste recycling company. I can't speak to the size of that garbage room. I would say that in terms of the handicap stalls, this is some of the location of those is also part of the development and building permit. And so I would rely on my staff to do a detailed review of some of that. But Tom maybe wants to speak to that. Do you want to say anything about the garbage room or?
I'm certainly pleased to see that. So garbage will be.
You're going to need to come up to the mic.
Thank you.
Oh, there's a moving mic. Oh,
Finicky about my trash.
It would have to go way up. Okay. Good evening. So I'm Kaylee Gildart, part of the Gildart family. Garbage will be collected daily, and I am told that it is in compliance with Valley Waste requirements. So that's what I can tell you with garbage.
Thank you.
You're
Valley
welcome.
Waste, I don't think picks up from, so they don't pick up from apartment buildings, so
Yeah.
you must be.
Okay, perhaps there's a different company that would deal with that, but this is what I'm being told. So
Safeguard? Safeguard,
Okay.
yeah.
Okay, thank you, Joe. Okay, thank you. Good to know.
Does anyone else have to
Does
chat? about
anybody else
handicap
have
parking spots or
any
garbage?
questions about garbage? If not, then go ahead,
Okay,
Councilor Butler, you want to open up parking?
So, yeah, so just, it's a question slash comment, because I mean, it was a lot of parking discussion from the public, which was great. I love all the comments about how we want to move away from less parking. We have an opportunity between now and the actual development of this to have conversations with Acadia about the abundance of parking that they have on campus that is generally not allowed to be used by the public. Is that something that is going to be a thing? I look at the theater festival parking lot. I look at the athletics complex parking lot, where I look at my building where we only have 8 garages for 16 units. So that's part of our rental agreement. We pay extra for that. And then it was suggested that we get an Acadia parking pass as the side lot because they had chats with Acadia about that. So just wondering about those conversations with Acadia in terms of additional parking.
So since our former CAOs at Acadia, we've already started some conversations around moving the needle on actually having a true shared strategy around parking. And I did mention, I'll just say it again. There's 2 different approaches being taken right now. One is monetizing parking. And certainly the university leases the subway parking lot and the public lot behind the market. But we have a lot of free parking that, you know, the students that I teach at Acadia tell me directly that why would I get a parking pass when I know I can park for free over here? So some of that will come down to some of the old agreements that we've had. We have used the Festival Theater in the past seasonally. I think there is certainly an openness to do that. I think we need to understand a little bit what they're trying to achieve with the approach that they are taking and how that's going. I haven't really heard from their vendor hotspot on exactly what success or not is happening at the university. We're still scoping exactly what that's going to look like, but just to tie this into some other work that's forthcoming, we have been talking about taking a closer look at some of our downtown issues. So the C2 zone has been kind of sitting there. We've been wanting to do something with it, do a piece of work on it. There's some desire to do some work around the rail line, and there's this bigger question of housing. it's certainly not lost on staff, some of the comments that are made about cash in lieu. We haven't used that requirement, right? So that $8,000 per parking spot that came in, we haven't actually applied that to a large project. And so that's why I was alluding to, at the time of approval, the only data point we had was 336, right? And we tripled that at the time. You know, that was the best we could do at the time, right? It is what it is. And so I think there's a bunch of different parking pieces. I've talked to other people about, you know, is there a desire for an overflow lot? We've had in the capital budget in the past, down by the farmer's market or in another area that we own, do we put some other additional overflow parking on the edge of town? And so some of these comments that we've received tonight are very relevant, and I know most of council has heard some of this stuff before. It's just we need to tie it together and work with the university and bring some of that actual investment and project forward.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Other parking questions? Councillor Palmer.
Yes, yeah. Okay, can you pull up that map view that we were looking at for the transformer?
So not a parking question.
Well, it's going to be.
Okay.
So who owns those parking spots to the very north of the building?
So there was a transaction that happened when we bought this from Nova Scotia Power. And the owner of 292 released an existing easement so that we could facilitate a purchase there. These things were kind of tied together in the past. And so they have an access easement, which was referred to, that comes in the driveway and comes around and goes in their parking garage, obviously. But the underlying area there is the town parking lot. Like the property line is the property line. And then the easement has, you know, access, vehicular access primarily, but also service access for servicing the rear of the building.
So the easement is to the east of the building.
Those will be public parking spots behind the building. I think that's where you're going with that.
Essentially, yeah.
Those will be public parking spots. The transformer, maybe I'll just say now, I haven't received drawings on the transformer. The expectation has been, and this goes back to my other point, there's quite a bit of other professionals that have to get involved in locating the transformer from where it was to a new location within the building. So that could be done a number of different ways. I haven't received all the details for that yet because it involves re-evaluating their electrical plan, which in the timeline of this project and moving this forward, that is a piece that we've flagged as part of the site plan, as part of the development permit. And we've heard loud and clear from council, and that's been the message to the developer, is the transformer's not going in the park space. So they've, if just so for everyone's information, it was right here.
Yeah. So these parking lots that are immediately north of the building, they exist today, right? That's not a new parking lot. That's the existing park. It's a little refined.
It's a bit different, but essentially, yeah, they're there today. Yeah.
Okay. Which, you know what my next question is? Where's the laydown area?
So there's been some discussion with previous parks director around laydown areas, and then Alex, our current director of engineering, has picked that up. So the thought at this point, and what we've communicated with the developers, so there was some talk of using some of the events lawn area. There's been talk of using a small piece of the parking lot, and that's where we're moving to now, is the area directly north. The other thing to keep in mind is we're doing a capital project in the parking lot. So there's going to be a lot of coordination between the developer and our contractors. We're also doing quite a bit of work on the east of the driveway with the concrete pathway and landscaping that's coming in there. So some of this is, we have to see how different pieces of work line up. So we may be finished, we may not be, but that's what we're trying to coordinate now. What Alex has communicated is essentially this area right behind the building here.
Yeah, so I've just suggested we're not going to do our parking lot in the next 3 years or 2 years or whatever it takes until the building is finished. Like, That's my feel, because we're not gonna half do our parking lot and then redesign it again, I would hope.
It's not a redesign. I think it's just our plan is to do the parking lot. Yeah, we have to spend that ACOA funding, and so the tender package is basically ready. I've looked.
How much room do you anticipate he's gonna need for laydown? Because he's gonna need at least 2 trailers, at least.
So I mean, I've been involved in very urban projects with no laydown, where there's essentially zero space in a really tight urban environment.
That's a
And
concrete.
I
building,
think, Tom, I don't know how extensive a laydown is for this building, but that's the area that we've talked about is directly behind the building. And that's all we've been communicating.
Green line there, it's including the green will be the laydown there. And the access to that will have to happen, you know, where the driveway is shown now. So, I mean, other contractors have talked about the front podium being partly.
Oh, sorry.
Oh, so
Tom,
you need
could
a mic.
use the mic, yes, sorry,
Sorry.
thank you.
That's a good point. Sorry about that.
Okay, so what's on the screen there, the row of parking plus the green area that you see immediately behind the building would be the laydown area accessed by the driveway, which is partly shown north of the parking spaces. And there has been some discussion of using for smaller processes, the front podium as partly laydown area. All of that gray there in front of the building. Once the podium is constructed, which is the first thing to do, then a lot of that laydown and storage and all those other things can happen in the podium while the rest of the building is going up. So there's a whole dynamic that goes on, which only the general contractor is going to be able to tell us. They will all do it differently. Like we've had 10 buildings built and they all do it differently. Depends on how the crane is located, if there's a crane, all that sort of thing.
Is a general contractor anticipated to be a contract or a union contractor or not?
General contractor is not yet selected. So we don't know.
Thank you. Councillor McKay.
Director Lake, can you refresh my memory? I think we had a conversation of how many, when we do use the ACOA funding to add parking, how many spots are there now and how many will be added? I was trying to go back to my January 19th one, but I didn't see it.
Say it was in January 19th.
Wasn't, it's referenced in the package, I thought, but now is it, was it the January 19th package?
It's an entire row of parking, at least, which is the entirety of the length against the rail trail.
Okay, what's
So
gravel now?
I'm just throwing a number out, but I would say it's at least 20. Yeah, I mean, if that's a row of 10, it's double that, and we'll have a new drive lane on the other side. So yeah.
So adding about 20 spots to that.
Yeah.
Okay. Can if we're talking about, I don't know, if we're talking about transformer or parking at the moment, but if I think for me, the preferred location for the transformer would be on the property of 292. However, if it can't be due to whatever, I was gonna say Maritime Electric, that's my PEI days. Nova Scotia Power says, I'm hoping that it will not then take up, it can be strategically placed that it's not taking up any more than one parking spot in that.
I hope that it's taking up 0 parking spots.
Okay.
Yeah, so that's what I will be shooting towards. Yeah.
I have a second.
Go ahead.
So My understanding on car shares is that there aren't very many companies that are willing to leave HRM at the moment. So what is the likelihood of a car share coming? And if there isn't, that certainly adds a new dynamic. The DA says there'll be $100,000 if there isn't one in place by 2 years. Is it possible to have a signed car share agreement in place upon signing of the DA?
I don't know if, I'm not sure. Are you talking about a third party car sharing company service? I'm not sure that's the intended operational model of this. I
So
think it's two
current-
cars owned by the building that are used for the residents of the building. So it's
That's how I.
there's other buildings in the province that do that. I think there's been I know of a few people that have explored what you're discussing, which is a third party service, and that is true. Yeah.
Councillor Ingham.
Yeah, so I just want to hit on a few things that I've asked before. And I do want to thank you for clarifying and tidying up some of the timing concerns, because you did tidy them up quite a bit, because I think they were way out in quite a few, well, maybe 2029. And then I was like, is this going to come back for another amendment on a development agreement? So just looking through it, site work and podium construction to commence no later than June 1st. And then you have exterior February 1st, 2025. And then upon failure to meet any above timing requirements, the town may discharge the development agreement. So those are a bunch of timelines. So the June 1st one, the 2024 is the first one. So if they don't meet it on that date, we can discharge the agreement. Is that how this is read?
Yeah, yes, but I mean, that's a process that we're bringing this back to
Right.
council and we're talking.
Council would have to make.
Yeah,
that
no, I know, but I
Okay.
mean, it's tighter. Like, I mean, I'm thinking because we've had these timing issues, like this was approved in 2029. And many of the public, as you hear tonight, are concerned about, is this project going to go through? And I understand this is a council decision, but one sort of impacts the other. June 1st is not a long ways off, right? And so if that doesn't meet, that comes back to council for a decision?
So we have that outlined as a non-substantive amendment that we have already done that. And so that would come back to council as a non-substantive amendment. It just requires council to decide one way or the other. Certainly a course of action is to discharge the agreement. I mean, we put in those tighter timelines at the direction of council, right? Those three
Yeah,
milestones
yeah,
were discussed here. Yeah.
Yeah, we wanted it tighter. I just wanted to be clear on those specific ones, and that's how tight that is, that it would come back to council.
Yep.
On June the 2nd, basically.
Well, yeah.
Well, I mean, if you're going to be nitpicky.
I would
I
would say in advance of June. I would have an idea
would
before
have an
June
idea
1st,
before
and
that,
hopefully
yeah.
we could bring it and relay the information we have at the time. Yeah.
You have more questions, Councillor Ingham?
No, I mean, if I'm hearing what I heard from the public tonight, I mean, I'm hearing from, people that own businesses here, people that own small businesses, and, they struggle with the parking issue, right? So this is a larger project, right? And so the amount of the 66,000 in lieu was approved back in 2019. I know that goes within the new MPS, following that, but is that reasonable given, I guess we asked that question before. I guess I'm
Well,
just opening it for
I think
discussion.
your primary data point for cash in lieu is 336 Main Street. We don't have another precedent for you. So those metrics at the time were put in there because that's how much a parking stall cost. So a surface parking stall at that time was $5,000 to $8,000. That's what we were
That's what you were
ballparking in there. This file is a bit different, and I've tried to outline some of that. So we were informed by the only cash in lieu payment we've received, which judge that for what it is. It was $20,000. And so we made a significant jump on that. Plus we have the car sharing arrangement, which it remains to be seen how successful that is. I think that's a very good tool for the development to reduce individuals owning vehicles. There's a significant bike parking requirement, and we added additional bike parking on the exterior of the building. as part of the amendments. I think those are all the points that I had on that previous slide, but is it enough? I would say that listening to what people are saying here, I think there's a discussion that needs to be had about that requirement. And I would say it's not, from my seat today, I would say it's not hitting the mark, particularly in a housing crisis. Right? I think it's very difficult to provide housing, and Mr. Raffi is spot on. If we want to encourage especially smaller developers to come in and be able to do that, that's a non-starter. Right? So it is what it was what it was at the time. And I think conditions have changed substantially. It deserves a look.
Okay.
Yeah.
Can I follow up to a question that I forgot to ask about the timing? Because we did receive an email and we did hear it a bunch of times tonight, and maybe Charles can clarify this. And I do believe that that Ian did ask before, I don't know how many months it was ago, about, would they be able to offer some credible financial backing? Can they offer that to council to know that this project's going to go through? And then, so the performance bond has come up tonight. Is that something that is on these type of projects, or is it more commercial based? We've heard that over and over again, so I don't know, like, or.
I can speak to it as well. I mean, I've been involved in a lot of different projects with performance bonding, none here other than our capital works that we do. So we would take a bond, for the road that's being built in the West End to ensure that it's built to a certain standard. And I may have been misunderstanding this, so excuse me if I was, but I think there was an impression from the speaker speaking about that we would go in and finish the building. And I'm not sure that would be the case. With a road project and civil works, we are very capable of doing that. I don't think we're in the business of building buildings. So I think the market would kind of be involved, obviously, in administering who or what is done if this completely fell apart. Charles, I think it might, if you want to add anything to that.
Sure. So, I've seen a fair number of development agreements, not province-wide, obviously, but I'm not aware of a performance bond being utilized in other development agreements. I don't think it's been used in the past in Wolfville. And they say not in my experience in the other municipalities that I've worked with.
Councillor Palmer.
Just in the timelines type things. So you don't have a builder at this stage?
There have been discussions with different general
Come up to the.
Oh, sorry, Caitlin.
Kaylee Gildert again. So there have been discussions with different general contractors, and I know that there is a preferred contractor, but of course you have to give contractors time to accept the project. And until we went through this phase with you, we were not able to say with 100% confidence which builder we would go with. So following decision tonight, we'll be in a better position to make that decision.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I just want to say something else here. So I really think it's important to understand the level of risk that these projects are going through at a development agreement stage. There is no assumption that this project's being approved. And so to lock in contracts with people without knowing what the timeline is, I mean, for the developers from their seat, this could take another 2 years. They're not sure. And so that's why there's exploration on certain issues, but to really do the diligence to lock some of this stuff in. This is very typical in all of the development agreements I've worked on, is that unless there's 100% certainty, there's certain things that would be sort of held until they know that there's support from council. And then the rest of the process has more certainty. They know they can do their development permit drawings, their building permit drawings, and then they can start securing a timeline, lay down details, all of these things. But the big milestone in these projects is getting planning approval. And this is what we're doing.
Yeah, so the rest of those bogeys are fictitious at this point. Even if we approved it tonight, you still have to design the building. The building's not designed, correct? it's, it's not a, it's, absolutely.
So this is a very unusual situation because we had.
Your mic on? Is it? Okay, I can't see the light.
Yep.
We have basically construction documents from a previous version of this building, which was wood framed, which had one more story. So we have a lot of information already drawn and specified. And based on that information, the client has in fact had a construction manager alongside him for several months, most of the year actually. So the reason that we had to go back from mild steel frame to lightweight steel frame to wood is because there was a detailed estimate given to him based on what were not yet quite construction drawings, but detailed drawings. So those exist. In order for us to begin to, and also we've got detailed drawings for the podium because the podium hardly changed. And we had a construction permit for the podium. So there's a lot of information that typically we don't have at this stage, but no contractor has been finalized yet. Finalizing a contractor, and it's not clear whether there will be a general contractor for a lump sum contract or a construction manager, which, as you probably know, is a different kind of construction arrangement. We have a contractor lined up to do the concrete work, so we can begin because we have enough detail for that. And so there's probably going to be some kind of overlap between construction and finalizing all the rest of the building above the podium. So, I mean, that's a complicated answer, but there is no simple answer.
That's a fair answer. So the, just talking about the podium itself then, because so you think you're actually close to being able to pour, ready to pour?
For the
For the
concrete
podium,
structure of
yeah.
the podium,
Mhm.
there is sufficient drawings probably within, I would say, at the most 2 to 3 weeks that we can actually call for the contract. Yeah. And that's just the concrete frame and the slab at level 2. Yeah. And the footings and so on associated with all that.
So
there'll
that
be
does make those
there'll be
bogies a little more.
sequential tendering, my guess is.
Sure. Yeah, no, that makes sense.
Councillor Madeira Voss, you did have your light on, but it's gone out. I didn't know if you still had a question.
Well, it's, the parking question is still nagging at me.
Okay.
And I guess, Director Lake, what you were saying about the micro boutiques is that the figure that was arrived at that time was the cost of putting in a parking spot at that time. Is that correct? It was $5,000 to $8,000 per parking spot?
So that's the requirement that was informed by both Micro Boutique and the negotiations on this file, and the
No.
numbers at the time that it cost to build a parking spot. So put in a surface parking spot in.
So at the time, which this would have been 5 years ago.
Yeah.
What is the cost compared to today?
I'm not sure. I don't know how much something like that would have gone up officially. I don't have the number.
I guess that's my concern, that we have really, what I'm hearing is a huge benefit going to this developer at 66,000 for in lieu of parking. And I'd like to see that updated to what that figure would be according to today's costs. At the very least, because this just doesn't feel right in relation to other business folk in our community. I think that if we're going to try to create some kind of level or equity, I think we have to update that.
Can I just talk about this a bit more? So since the new planning documents have come in, there's been very little development activity in the town. Okay, so this cash and lieu requirement that we're discussing has not been used. Okay, the previous requirement and the older planning documents, at one point there was no parking requirement. we actually introduced a parking requirement with the new planning documents. Okay, so everything was negotiated. 336, I wasn't involved in the front end of that. I don't know how they came up with 20,000. That seems incredibly low to me as well.
I agree.
And so we really, and I was involved in this one, that was scaled off of that number because we were dealing with the same planning documents that approved 336. And so it's hard to speculate because all of the existing businesses, there is no, I wouldn't say there's necessarily an unfair playing field being created from a single building that isn't actually using the new requirement. And so we're trying to bring forward here some acknowledgement of the negotiation that happened for over 3 years as well.
Correct, but what we have then with the parking is that we're charging an amount that was negotiated under the old MPS, correct?
Yes.
And yet a lot of the changes that we are being asked to approve with the amendment relates to the new MPS, correct?
That is true, yes.
So if we are looking at those changes, my preference would be that that parking piece be aligned with the new MPS. That would be my request.
I see Councillor McKay, were you going to respond, Director Lake? I see you jotting things down.
Not really. I think I spoke to this during my presentation. I think the difficulty, if you're looking at the policies around parking in the municipal plan, is what we've stated our priorities being. And so those are promoting these different types of active transportation modes and infrastructure that support those things. So I do find there's a tension with that policy direction, some of the other investments that we're making, and talking about the parking issue. So I don't have an answer. I'm just saying I think there's an issue that needs to be resolved there.
Yeah, I'd like to get questions unless you can give us an answer that says how you're going to manage the parking. Is that what you're going to do?
Well, you can rule me out of order as soon as I think it's probably important to see the parking contribution as one part of all the contributions. So this project makes a contribution
I am
to
going to
public
really
art
out of order.
and to other things like the Eastern Gateway. If you take all of that, it's a bigger number than you were talking about, much bigger number.
Thank you. Councillor McKay.
Okay. My math brain is going here for a second. So when I go back to, even though the micro boutiques were under our last MPS, I don't know where they came up with that number either, because it was $20,000. And my understanding is that there were 25 spots for 65 apartments, which leaves us 40 spots. So that's $500 a parking spot, not 5,000. Okay, that's a huge difference. So, and for me, what I need to wrap my head around in terms of this dollar amount is this. There are 25 spots, 2 car shares, but I'll get to that. So 25 spots for 60. That gives me 35 missing spots. Okay, if we say that the 2 car shares will take 20 cars out of there, which was in the report, that leaves me with 15. Right?
Good so far.
Okay. At 15, at $8,000 a spot is 120. At 4,000, it's 60. So 66 is not completely out of the realm, I don't think, but I'm not saying it's exactly right, but it's closer than when I first started this at the beginning of this evening, because did that make sense? At 4,000. And does it say 8,000 explicitly in our MPS?
Yeah.
Okay.
I think that's in the land use plan.
Okay. So why are we allowed to act outside our LUB unless we just decide to do so?
So I mentioned this at the beginning, the development agreement is obviously informed by the
Yeah.
LUB, but the purpose of it is really we're creating a mini land use control document for a site. And so if we're just using our LUB, we don't need to use development agreements, right? They just have to check all the boxes. That's what as of right development is, right? And Marcia does a really good job. That's what she does. She administers the land use bylaw. So the test here, which we've been talking through here, is we use it to inform things. And there was a comment made about this not being compliant with the LUB on building height. Well, it is compliant with building height. And that we established a realistic building height per story through this process, very much informed by this building. But yeah, I'll admit that there is a challenge here where we've bridged two sets of documents. There's policies that send us in certain directions and are very aspirational that this project is responding to without question. So if there is direction coming from council on things like more cash in lieu of parking, I would really appreciate knowing exactly what that number is, what the expectation is, because there has been a significant amount of contribution that has been negotiated through this process, not just about parking. And going back into that negotiation process, I'm not sure we'll get what we are receiving as far as I know. There's some debate on what I'm saying about public benefit. I would stand by what I'm saying around public benefit for this project. So yeah, that's kind of the tension around some of this, just to be honest, is I really need the clear direction on this if there's going to be pieces like that we want to make decisions on.
So right now I'm saying 66 lies somewhere in between the two numbers that I came up with. However, I'm not saying I'm okay with the number or not okay with the number until we get to the end of this and decide what the full public benefit was. Because there are other parts to this, contributions of the park and all those other things that I need to get into the bigger picture to decide what holistically that would look like. But for now, I'm gonna park.
Councilor Madera-Voss.
Thank you, Mayor Donovan. I just wanted to respond to the comment about other public benefit beyond the 66,000, and I appreciate that. And I stand to be corrected, but the public art piece was always a part of the project, correct? So if that is not an additional public benefit in lieu of anything, right? That was always there. So, and I appreciate that. I think that was a wonderful piece, but I am not looking at that as part of this whole question around whether the 66,000 is fair or not, or does it fit with our current LUB. The park at the, what were we calling that? You know, the plaza. My understanding was that that was offered up because we were not getting the 5th floor view. And we decided that what was being offered to us in terms of the 2nd floor was really not useful. I mean, we appreciated that offer, but really it didn't compare. And so as a way of balancing the fact that we were no longer getting the 5th floor view, this plaza I saw as the benefit, the sort of trade-off, because we weren't going to be getting that 2nd story. And the fact that the developer will be making more money because we've said that that whole area in the 2nd story can be turned into apartments, which will generate money. So I think that trade-off to me seemed fair. We're giving up space that was proposed in exchange for this pub. So I see those two things matching up. So I just want to be clear that I see this as a very balanced. I don't think that there's a lot of additional public benefit compared to what was there in the original development agreement. I think we've tried to find ways to balance things out. But now that this issue has been raised by several people regarding the LUB and what is stipulated for parking in lieu of, or in lieu of parking, I think that needs to be examined. I think that's fair. And I don't think that that in any way negates how the value of these other trade-offs. And I really appreciate that. I think that that plaza is a lovely addition. I won't go on about the green wall. But I did
We'll
have
get
a
into
suggestion.
comments. We're still doing questions. Do you have more questions?
I have a green wall related question, but if somebody else has
We're
another,
still-
we're not there
still on
yet.
Parking.
Is that okay?
Yes, parking. That's a Palmer. No, sorry.
Okay. The, with the parking, like we're giving, this is in lieu of parking and it's for the life of the building. And I'm guessing that's, pick a number, it's 40, 100 years, I don't know, it's not a couple of weeks. So for, if the number is 60,000 for, you know, let's say it's 50 years for easy math, that's pretty cheap. I can look at somebody in the audience and he'd be happy to pay that for the next 50 years in his place. Because we're to be looking after the plowing. We're going to be I'm sure the liability. I feel that we're liable for all the parking, the same as it's any other public. It's a public parking space. And I just wondered, like, if it's a 60-room hotel, short-term hotel, or it's a 5-year hotel, that's the different use of that parking lot. So is there some way we could put in, like, let's review this in 3 years, and what is the use of the building? And if it's a hotel, then let's charge it as a, you know, a parking lot for a hotel. And then he would be, the owner would be responsible for additional contribution. I don't know how that would work or if it would even possible to do that. But if nobody's using a parking lot, fine. I'm fine with the 60 grand. But if everybody's using it, I'm not. And that is a big, it really sticks in my craw that we're giving away, like, it's potentially giving away a lot. Because if it's a hotel, I think there's really only one way to get to Wolfville at this point, and that's in your own bloody car, because there's no train. Does the bus even run? Well, I guess the bus still runs here, but it's short of a cab or a bus. The only way to get here is by private car. So, you know, that's my parking bit.
Councillor McKay.
I don't disagree. So the dollar amount, I still can't 100% for it, but at the end of it, then can it be an operational agreement? If the DA says, we'll take $66,000 or whatever the number is, we come to an agreement on. And there is an operational agreement that says we are going to cost share the snow removal or blah, blah, whatever else that incurs, upkeep. It's gonna have to be repaved in 15 years and that's on us. Like all of those types of things. Is there an addendum we can add to the DA that says we are gonna have some sort of agreement to keep this up and maintained, line painted? I mean, the list probably goes on and on for maintenance
Maybe,
of
I don't know,
pavement.
Devon or Charles, is that something that could be added? Charles?
Certainly would be out of the ordinary. Typically, a development agreement establishes, really, it's a permission to build on certain conditions. And normally it's, you know, you set those conditions at the outset. So to sort of tag on some sort of operating agreement, I don't think the development agreement would be the place for that or the way to go about that.
Devon?
Yeah, I haven't seen anything like that done. I was going to just speak more broadly to some of this public benefit discussion because I think it's important. So if you look at some of the values in the development agreement that are there currently, We're totaling up in the $366,000 range. So that's significant. That's more than I've seen in any project I've worked on. As far as a full-on, like that's actual money that we're being given. And I could be wrong. Tom, you may work on projects that are of a larger scale where this type of thing is happening. That doesn't include the property tax revenue that would go from the roughly $6,000 it is now to, it will be well over $100,000. That's dollars to the town in revenue. And, you know, frankly, we really struggle with revenue. That everyone that's been involved in the capital budget knows that. So that's in perpetuity. That could contribute to some of these things that we're talking about, whether it's maintenance or operations, because that comes into our bottom line. There's other things that frankly, I believe are public benefits because I do think that it's really important to show that buildings can perform at a different level. Because if you're in my seat, you're dealing with a wide spectrum of developers, okay? And some of them aren't willing to sign on to things like 30% beyond the energy code. And different things that we have in here that are meeting public goals that we've stated in our climate action plan, for instance. And so I think, you know, you can call it a stretch if you want. I'm looking at these things because I've worked on the climate plan and the MPS and these different things. And so depending on how you want to tally the parking requirements, so the micro boutique, again, really, which I think is the project we were comparing this to at the time, right? We don't have another project to compare this to. So they have commercial use and they have no parking for the commercial use. Okay, so that wasn't calculated in the calculations. And as Councillor McKay said, they're paying about $500 per spot. So if you took this to all of the commercial use, restaurant, retail, all of those types of requirements, you could be anywhere just from a cash in lieu of parking perspective in the 328,000 to 500,000 of additional cost for this building. That's sort of the reality of, I think that's the question that you're asking. So I mean, I have spent a tremendous amount of time looking at this. I just want to state that. I didn't, I think there's some comments in some of the correspondence that we received that we haven't really looked at this issue. I can assure you that Marcia, my development officer, and I, and Charles have all looked at it. I'm just looking at my notes on my phone. That's why I'm looking at my phone. Yeah, I think that's everything I have here on. Sorry, I'm just making sure I actually say what's on this notes for public benefit. But yeah, so it's substantial at $8,000 a spot.
Councillor Palmer?
So when the developer first came to us, they had a plan to put, I'll use the word viewing room on the second floor, correct? That's what the plan was. That's what they presented.
They came back with the amendment package, yes.
Yes, okay. So that would have taken out 2 units. Am I correct in saying that?
No, so they just reoriented the floor plans. There's 60 units proposed and 60 units currently. There's not there isn't a benefit of 2 additional units. It's always been a cap of 60 units. We haven't that's been the same in the original agreement and the current agreement.
Okay, so at least, well, then if that's the case, there's at least 2 units that are bigger. I think it's still on.
So at no stage do we have less than 60 units. When we had the viewing room, we rearranged the units so that we would still have 60 plus the viewing room.
Mhm.
So the unit count stayed steady the whole time through.
But now the viewing rooms are essentially gone. And so now you've taken that room somewhere and done something
Yes,
with it.
That's right. We've got slightly bigger units in some places. The viewing room was quite small. It was 2 very small units. And then, so we rearranged the 4th floor where we had a lot of extra room. And we gave a little bit of it to each of the units up there. So the number 60 hasn't changed. The unit sizes have changed. Some of the unit sizes.
Okay.
That's a constant puzzle that we always work with. You take room away from something, and when that goes away, you give it back to something.
Can I ask a question about that? It's come up a few times tonight, whether it's going to be residential units or short-term rentals, and we've heard the term hotel. Can we have clarity on, will these be residential units, largely residential units? So long-term year leases or whatever leases usually?
I have a text here from our client. Our operational plans, long-term housing.
So where did the discussion of short-term come from? I just want to clarify it for people in the audience and watching.
Well, I can't add much more, I think.
Okay,
It was the meeting.
Yeah, yeah.
He stated
Right.
he would do whatever was financially best.
yes, I remember.
It was his word.
It was his words, exactly.
Yes, but the plan is for long-term residential housing.
Well, I can tell you what I was.
Yeah, okay. Councillor McKay.
I'd like to build on that. So can we put that in the development agreement that for 15 years it will be long-term housing?
Kevin, Charles?
I only chose 15 to match the other
but
things that were
they-
in there.
Just to clarify that, though, they did have in there initially like 10 hotel units and 10 short-term rentals, so it was 40. We were looking at 40 long-term, right?
But that wasn't what they just said, so now I'm asking if it can
Yeah,
be
no,
all that for
yeah,
for
no,
a time
just,
period.
just wondering if he was saying mostly being that 40, or was the whole 60 going to be long-term rentals, so no hotel rooms?
Kevin?
I just want to talk about, I have some notes about short-term rentals that I just want to touch on, so everyone has the same information. So we have struggled policing short-term rentals with compliance in Wolfville, and many other places in the province have as well. So the province has stepped in, and they're really taking some steps to remedy that. The remedy hasn't been working because basically people can still check that they're in compliance with local zoning. Okay, so April 1st, there's what we're being told, and sorry if I'm generalizing this, but there's a bit of a new regime coming in where they will actually have to come to the town. That's going to have a significant impact. We anticipate there's quite a few short-term rentals in the town that are not located in the locations where they can be. Okay, so we're going to have a pile of compliance to deal with. Where hotels are permitted is the C1 zone. Okay, so if someone comes in to Market tomorrow and puts a development permit in front of them and says, I want to convert this to this, we don't have a tool to say no. The permitted uses in the C1 zone, I think for good reason, is a very long list. And so that's sort of the balance. I think one of the speakers that was talking about where and how some of this is going to level out over time, I think is really important to consider. Because I mean, I'm taking this text message as the information I have as well. But I just want to talk from my seat. I hear a lot about there not being enough rooms in town, right? That is something I'm hearing all the time, and I assume some of you are as well. So I would also agree with the people that say we're not in a hotel crisis. That's also fair. But I just want to share the information on the compliance piece of short-term rentals, because I think we are on the cusp of eliminating some number of hotel rooms, Airbnbs, come April 1st.
Outside of C1. No, sorry, Joe. Run for council next year. You can.
This year.
This year, it's for the next year. I'm looking forward to it. It is.
I'll vote for you, Joe.
Councillor Madeira Glass.
So on that, I just have a question around that blend. I mean, I appreciate that this is a C1 property, short-term hotel, that's all allowed. But there is a tax difference, is there not? Given if this is long-term versus if this is a hotel. And short-term is really under residential at the moment, right? Residential
Not
tax
even-
rate,
No. Long-term is. So.
long-term, but short-term is a commercial on C1.
Yes,
So then we would have a building that would have some residential tax rates and some commercial tax rates.
and I assume PVSC would evaluate that and tell us what.
So how,
taxes.
this is maybe too much of a practical question, but one of the comments was, you know, it could be residential. I think micro boutiques does that. 8 months for students is residential, 4 months is, you know, short term. I mean, that would all be monitored then by
That's my
PVSC.
understanding.
Okay. Thank you. I just want to say there is a need for that accommodation in town. Like there's no question. I don't want to. And it was referred to a couple of meetings ago. My understanding was that there were some things that were being looked at with financing with banks and how much they would. So that's why we didn't have a definite number around how many would be of each kind, but that there would be a mix. Yeah. Okay.
I don't know. If we- financing people.
What? I think we might be ready to move on to comments, but I know in the break, a couple of counselors were talking about having a request to make one of the larger, I don't want to steal anyone's thunder, so Counselor McKay, if that's what you're going to bring up.
Yeah, I have a couple more on them. So on the affordability piece, I have in my notes here, I really would like the affordability to be expanded, not just to the bachelor and 1 bedroom, but also one of the affordable or one of the accessible units needs to be affordable. And so does one of the 2 bedrooms. There has to be especially the accessible one needs to be affordable. I think that would be, that's a must for me if that was agreeable to everybody else, but I think that would be important from my standpoint.
Is that something, Director Lake, that can be written into the development agreement, or how does that work? Because
That would be something we'd have to go back to the developer with. Yeah, there's no mandate in our planning documents to say you must provide X and X, one Y affordable units. So
so just thinking of process, would we amend the motion if and when we get to that, or? Because once the motion should the motion be passed, then horse has left the barn until we're back here.
I think we would, I mean, I don't know if any type of answer can be provided right now. I don't have an answer to that.
Sure. This is an important item, I gather, to our
So
council.
I guess my question, what you're evaluating is the current proposal or submission against the current MPS. I think that is the question. So if it's meeting the current MPS without the concessions that Councillor McKay is asking for, I think that is the basis upon you're being asked to make your decision.
I think the development agreement meets the MPS, but a development agreement takes the land use bylaw and jiggles it around a bit, adds some stuff, gives some opportunities, has some expectations. So what we are asking is, could the development agreement be further massaged to incorporate one of the 2 bedrooms as an affordable unit, and is it an accessible, and those are not the same units. It's not a 2-bedroom accessible unit. Am I right? They're
They're
separate
different.
things.
Yeah. Yeah.
So a development agreement, we can add and subtract as we like. It still meets the MPS. It's not, it's not as Director Lake said, this is not a site plan approval.
That's a decision that I am not, that's not within my purview to make this evening. So I don't know what that means relative to our proceedings, but that would have to be taken back to the developer.
Yes, and one thing might be to amend our motion. Should it?
So just the nature of what really is a contractual negotiation that we're in, we wouldn't be amending it unless Kevin, the developer, was also in agreement. So we've negotiated, the terms of this DA, and they have been agreed to by the other party. If there's changes or amendments, that I don't want to, I don't know if that's a big
Yes,
deal or not.
understood.
And so we'd have to go back
enough.
and there'd have to be a discussion about that.
Councillor McKay?
That was one I had. So and this might be in there, but I didn't quite catch it. So the public art that says that the mural will be done and the first one will be done on the building and the contribution will be $5,000. What happens if the murals are more than $5,000 and they are on the building? I'm assuming that is the developer's costs, not ours. It does not say that, but I'm assuming, assuming it's me in trouble. So which is it? The developer pays it? It doesn't say that on there. It just
There's a
says-
bit of an evolving process going with some of this public art. We've just recently, I've been requested to bring back information on a public art process. And so the amendments that we made were more to keep this in line with the process of the day. And so that may be our public art group, whatever it is at the time, may want to collaborate and use some of the funds being generated both by the town in concert with these funds, or perhaps with someone else. It's a speculative piece, but the expectation isn't that the town is paying for the public art. If that's where you're going with that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it didn't say in that clause, so that was the question. So I guess yet to be determined. The streetscaping, it says that it is a public benefit and it is, if it is not finished, that we will charge them $150,000 to finish it. Albeit saying that the cost is way exceeding the $150,000. So I'm not sure why we would do that. If the streetscaping is to be done, it will be done. And if it's not done and we finish it, we charge the full cost back. I don't know why we would only charge a portion of it. It's a flat rate of 150. If we're bargaining in good faith and if the developer says it's going to be done, you can put $3 million there because that's what he's going to be finishing it. So it really doesn't matter. My last piece is the plaza that is in the parks plan. I would assume, which has not ever been consulted with the public or anything else. And what I've learned lately is people like to view the opposite direction than the street. If I heard everyone correctly from the last 2 weeks. So not that I don't like the plaza, but let's be clear, it's part of the parks plan and that design has not been vetted anywhere, anyplace, anyhow. So the $50,000 will go through the park, not necessarily as it is in the diagram. I just want to make that clear.
That actual concept was taken out of an acoustics plan that I think was almost a year in development with significant consultation. It's not, I agree with you, it's a concept, but we're not just pulling that out of nowhere. That was well developed by a whole landscape architecture team. We had multiple meetings to develop a whole vision of the East End. So that wasn't just pulled out of the air.
Deputy Mayor?
Yes, thank you. Just to respond to your questions, $5,000 for one of the three murals on one side of the building is not out of line. It just has to be done by public process. In my mind, same thing with the park or parklet or plaza. The Public Art Committee was going to put a piece of sculpture in there. And there was significant input from residents around the view. We want to be able to see the view. So it didn't happen for other reasons too, but yeah, just to respond to those.
Councillor Madeira Voss, did you? You don't have. Are there other questions? Otherwise, I'll open it up to people's comments.
I have a question,
Okay.
but it's not related to what we were talking about. It's a new
Oh,
topic.
that's good.
Okay, so this is back to my old thing. We're not getting a living wall. We're getting a vine, a green wall that's a vine. And I've been thinking about this for the last while because in my own house, we had a vine that was over 40 years old, covering the entire back section of our house that is well protected. Generally, it's trees, it's got other buildings, all of that. And about, I don't know, a month ago or whenever we had this big windstorm, the whole thing was ripped off and just, we have to cut it back because even though it was secure on a stucco building that you think these little things would cling to effectively, and it has for decades, the whole thing was ripped off. And so when I thought about that, and I thought about what's being presented, and that we're going to have vines growing from, down and up on a building that is so exposed by the water, where I honestly don't think it's going to happen. I appreciate the sentiment, but I think if we're going to get a green wall, we should probably look at painting a green wall there. And maybe and I'm not being facetious, art. I am thinking, instead of thinking about how do you put a planter there, how do you water it, how do you maintain it, how do you get to the roof to, make sure it grows down and up. There are these beautiful murals that I see when I visit my daughter in Montreal that are huge. And this is my suggestion, that instead of looking at a live plant, let's look at a mural of some live green plants that would be put on either side to break up all that brown and still have what we could call a green wall. It's just not alive in any way. And so that's my suggestion.
Chicago has some, downtown Chicago. I don't know if you've ever seen the light show on their big edifices that are quite beautiful. Councillor Palmater, did I see your light on?
Before we go to comments, I'd like to get some legal advice.
So you would like to go in camera?
I would like to move that we go in camera for legal.
Okay, all in favor? So we're going to ask Barb if you could take people outside. I don't know, we will be too long, but. And And we're gonna, are we ready after that question to move to comments, do you think? Can I get some water? You going out? Thank you. How many did we lose? We just got to, oh. No, I didn't know if we'd lost anybody else.
TV.
So where are the donuts?
Are they really?
It is.
I thought it never closed. Wow. I think I saw Carl's closed yesterday morning when I drove down. It was all dark. Tan's was open. Yeah, I've never seen them close, but
I mean, I was at Carl's yesterday morning.
okay, maybe it was just the lights. Oh, then it must have been open. 'Cause it just, I know, but his lights look dark, so. Let us know when you're ready, David.
It's always right.